One late night, an elderly black security guard caught a young man trying to steal money to buy medicine for his sick mother. Instead of calling the police, he gave the boy some cash and a job to help him earn an honest living, a decision that led to him being misunderstood and losing his job. What he never expected was that 5 years later that same boy would return as a wealthy CEO to repay the man who once saved his life. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you watching from. We love to hear your thought. The industrial district sat on the forgotten edge of town, where streetlights flickered more than they shone and the wind carried the metallic smell of old machinery. Calvin Jackson had worked the night shift at Morrison Warehouse for 11 years, long enough that the shadows felt like colleagues and the silence like an old friend. At 47, Calvin was a man shaped by solitude. His security guard uniform hung a bit loose on his frame, testament to too many dinners skipped in favor of instant coffee and whatever was left in the break room fridge. His small guard station was spartanly furnished, a radio that only picked up 2 stations, a logbook with entries so consistent they could have been written by a machine, and a single photograph, his mother smiling in her Sunday best, taken 3 years before she passed. "You really gonna spend another Friday night here?" Harris had asked that afternoon during the shift change. Harris Mitchell was 26, all energy and optimism, the kind of young man who still believed the world had good things waiting around every corner. Calvin had smiled, the way he always did when Harris tried to mother hen him. "Somebody's gotta make sure this place doesn't walk away in the night. Man, you need to get out more, maybe find yourself a lady friend, join a bowling league, something." "Bowling league?" Calvin had chuckled, shaking his head. "Harris, I appreciate the concern, but I'm fine. Been fine for a long time." But Harris had looked at him with those earnest eyes, the ones that reminded Calvin of his younger brother before the accident. "You know what your problem is, Cal? You act like being lonely is some kind of badge of honor." Calvin had turned serious then, his voice dropping to something almost confessional. "Loneliness doesn't kill you, son. You know what does? Regret. Regret will eat you alive from the inside out." Now, hours into his shift, Calvin sat in his guard station with rain hammering the metal roof like impatient fists. He'd made his rounds at 10 and midnight, checking locks, documenting everything in his meticulous handwriting. The coffee in his thermos had gone cold, but he drank it anyway. "Waste not, want not," another of his mother's sayings that had become gospel. At 2:47 a.m. he heard it, a sound that didn't belong, metal scraping, then a soft thud from Warehouse B. Calvin's hand moved to his flashlight, his body rising with the fluid motion of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, but his heart was beating faster. In 11 years nothing had ever actually happened on his watch. He moved through the darkness with practiced silence, his flashlight beam cutting through the rain-streaked night. The side door to Warehouse B stood open, swaying slightly in the wind. Calvin's jaw tightened. He'd locked that door himself 2 hours ago. Inside, the warehouse was a canyon of shadows and stacked pallets. His flashlight swept across rows of inventory until it landed on a figure, thin, young, frozen like a deer in headlights. The kid couldn't have been more than 17. White, scraggly hair plastered to his forehead by rain, wearing a soaked hoodie and jeans that had seen better days. His right hand trembled as it gripped a box cutter, the small blade catching Calvin's light. "Don't move," the kid shouted, but his voice cracked. "I don't want to hurt anyone, I just need money, just give me money and I'll go." Calvin stood perfectly still, taking in the scene with the calm of a man who'd seen his share of desperation. The kid's hand was shaking so badly the knife was practically useless. His eyes were wide, red-rimmed, from crying or lack of sleep or both. This wasn't a hardened criminal. This was a scared boy playing a role he didn't know how to perform. "Son," Calvin said quietly, "you're shaking so hard you can barely hold that blade." "I'm serious." The kid took a step forward, trying to project menace but achieving only panic. "I'll use this." "No, you won't." And then Calvin moved. It wasn't aggressive, it was almost gentle, but it was fast. He stepped inside the kid's reach, his hand closing around the thin wrist holding the box cutter. With a simple twist, the blade clattered to the concrete floor. Calvin's other hand caught the kid's shoulder, and before the boy could even process what was happening, he was sitting on the cold floor, looking up at the guard with shock and shame. Calvin pulled down the kid's hood, then tugged the makeshift mask, just a bandana, away from his face. The face beneath was young, baby-faced even, with tears cutting tracks through the grime on his cheeks. "Please," the kid sobbed, and the tough guy act dissolved completely. "Please, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. It's my mom, she's sick, really sick, and I don't have insurance, and the free clinic said they can't do anything else without money for real medicine, and I didn't know what else to do." Calvin looked at the crying boy, then around the warehouse. He knew every corner of this place, including the blind spots. The security camera covering this section had been on the fritz for 2 weeks, its red light blinking in that way that meant it was recording nothing but static. No one was watching. No one would ever know what happened in this moment, except the two of them. The old Calvin, the one from before his mother died, before his wife left, before his brother's car went off that bridge, that Calvin would have called the cops without a second thought. But the current Calvin, the one who knew what it meant to be desperate and alone, that Calvin looked at this crying kid and saw something different. He walked to his guard station, the kid watching him with confused, fearful eyes. Calvin opened the old metal cash box where he kept the petty cash for the coffee fund and emergency cab fare. $340, money that technically didn't belong to him, but money he'd been trusted with. He walked back and placed the cash on a nearby crate. "What's your name?" Calvin asked. "Eddie," the kid whispered. "Eddie Morrison." "Well, Eddie Morrison, here's what's going to happen. You're going to take this money and buy your mama's medicine. Then tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp, you're going to come back here. You understand me?" Eddie stared at the money like it was a mirage. What? If you don't show up, I'm calling the cops. I'm giving you the address on the arrest report. But if you come back, we're going to talk about you working off this debt. We always need help in the warehouse, legal help, you understand?" "Why?" Eddie's voice was barely audible. "Why would you help me? I tried to rob you." Calvin was quiet for a long moment, looking at this kid who reminded him so much of his brother, same age, same desperation in his eyes the night before the accident. "Because not everybody needs punishment, Eddie. Some people just need a chance." He paused, his voice rougher. "And maybe because I need to believe there's still something in this world worth saving." Eddie grabbed the money with shaking hands, tears still streaming. "I'll come back. I swear to God, I'll come back. 9 a.m., don't make me regret this." Calvin watched the kid run out into the rain, disappearing into the night like a ghost. Then he walked back to his guard station, looked at the broken camera with its meaningless blinking light, and sat down heavily in his chair. He pulled out his logbook and wrote, 2:47 a.m. investigated noise in warehouse B. Side door found unlocked, due to faulty latch, secured and documented. No further issues. His hand hovered over the page, then he added one more line in smaller letters, just for himself. Sometimes the right thing to do isn't the same as the legal thing. Calvin picked up his cold coffee, stared at his mother's photograph, and wondered if she'd be proud of what he'd just done or disappointed. Then again, she'd always said that mercy was stronger than judgment. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing away footprints and evidence, leaving only the memory of kindness given in the darkness where no one was watching. Morning came soft and gray, the rain from the night before leaving everything washed clean and smelling of wet concrete. Harris arrived at 6:30 a.m., earlier than usual, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the diner down the street, one black for him, one with 2 creams and 3 sugars for Calvin, even though Calvin always insisted he didn't need anything fancy. But Calvin's patrol car wasn't in its usual spot. Harris found a note taped to the guard station door. "Had to take the morning off, family matter. Cover for me, CJ, family matter." Harris frowned. In 3 years of working alongside Calvin, the man had never mentioned family, never taken a sick day, never been anything but reliable as clockwork. But everyone deserved a break, he supposed. Harris unlocked the station and settled in for a double shift. At 9:15 a.m., a kid showed up at the gate. He was thin, looked like he hadn't slept, and clutched a paper pharmacy bag like it contained gold. His eyes were red-rimmed but determined. "I'm looking for Calvin," the kid said. "Calvin Jackson." The night guard. Harris sized up the visitor, young, nervous, but standing straight like he was trying to prove something. "Calvin's not here today. Can I help you with something?" He told me to come back this morning. Said he'd have work for me." Harris raised an eyebrow. That sounded like Calvin, always seeing potential in people others overlooked. "What's your name, son?" "Eddie." "Eddie Morrison." "Well, Eddie, I don't know what Calvin promised you, but if he vouched for you, that's good enough for me. We're always short on inventory help." Harris extended his hand. "I'm Harris Mitchell, day shift supervisor. You got any experience with warehouse work?" "No sir, but I'm a fast learner. I'll work hard, I promise." There was something in the kid's voice, gratitude mixed with desperation, that made Harris think there was more to this story. But Calvin had trusted him, and Harris trusted Calvin's judgment more than most people's sworn testimony. "Tell you what, let me make some calls, get you set up with some paperwork. You'll start at minimum wage, mostly cleanup and stock help. Nothing glamorous." "That's perfect," Eddie said quickly. "That's more than perfect." As Harris led him toward the office, Eddie paused at the guard station, looking through the small window. The space was exactly as Calvin had left it, spare and neat, everything in its place. On the desk partially hidden under the logbook, Eddie could see the corner of a photograph. "Is Calvin okay?" Eddie asked. "He seemed, I don't know, tired last night." Harris smiled softly. "Calvin's always tired. Man works like he's got something to prove to himself." He paused. "But he's got a good heart. Best man I know actually. Doesn't talk much about his life, but you can tell he's been through some things." Eddie nodded, understanding more than Harris knew. That night, after his mother had finally fallen asleep with her new medication easing her pain for the first time in months, Eddie had lain awake thinking about the guard who'd given him money instead of handcuffs, a chance instead of a record. Who did that? What kind of person saw someone at their worst and chose to believe in their best? The paperwork took 2 hours. Eddie filled out forms with trembling hands, terrified they'd run a background check and find something, even though there was nothing to find. This was his first real brush with crime, and if that guard hadn't stopped him, it might have been the beginning of a terrible path. By afternoon, Eddie was wearing a warehouse vest and learning how to operate a hand truck. The work was hard, lifting, moving, organizing, but he attacked it with the fervor of someone paying off a debt that went beyond money. During his lunch break, Eddie found himself back at the guard station. Harris had left it unlocked while doing his rounds. Eddie shouldn't have gone in, but something drew him inside. The space smelled like old coffee, and something else, something like loneliness, if loneliness had a scent. The radio was tuned to a classical station, playing softly. The logbook sat open, filled with Calvin's neat, precise handwriting. The photograph on the desk showed a woman with Calvin's eyes, smiling in what looked like a church photograph. In the drawer, partially visible, was a piece of paper. Eddie knew he shouldn't look, but his hand moved anyway. It was a note written in Calvin's handwriting. "When you can still choose to be good, you're not broken yet." Eddie folded the paper carefully and slipped it into his wallet. He didn't know if Calvin had meant it for him, or had written it for himself, but it felt like a commandment, a reminder of the contract they'd made in the darkness. Over the following weeks, Eddie proved himself. He arrived early, stayed late, never complained. Harris grew fond of him, often sharing stories during breaks. Calvin used to say people are like keys, Harris told him one afternoon, while they sorted inventory. Even bent ones can still open the right doors, you just have to figure out which way to turn them. "He sounds like a wise man," Eddie said quietly. "He is. Lonely though. I worry about him sometimes. He's been working here longer than anyone, knows this place inside and out, but it's like he's hiding here, you know. Hiding from something in his past." Eddie understood that feeling. Wasn't he doing the same thing? Hiding from the person he almost became, the terrible choice he almost made permanent. 3 months in, Eddie's mother had a good day. She smiled, called him her good boy, told him she was proud of how hard he was working. 2 months after that, she was gone. The cancer that the medicine had held at bay finally won, as everyone knew it would. Eddie stood alone at the funeral. No other family, no friends, just him and a simple casket, and a preacher who'd never met his mother but said kind, generic words about eternal rest. Harris had offered to come, but Eddie had declined. Some grief was too private to share. Standing there in the cemetery, Eddie finally understood Calvin, understood why a man might choose solitude, might prefer the company of silence over the risk of losing someone else. He went back to work the next day, because work was all he had left. 5 years passed. Eddie Morrison was no longer the scared kid who'd almost thrown his life away. He'd worked his way up from warehouse floor to inventory manager, then took night classes in business management. At 23, he'd saved enough to start his own small contracting company. Nothing fancy, mostly home repairs and renovation work, but it was honest and it was his. He'd moved out of his mother's old apartment, found a modest place across town, but he kept her photograph on his dresser and the note from Calvin's drawer still folded in his wallet. When you can still choose to be good, you're not broken yet. The local newspaper ran a feature on him, From Rock Bottom to Solid Ground, Young Entrepreneur's Journey. They'd interviewed him at his small office, and Eddie had been careful with his words, talking about hard work and second chances without revealing too much. Some stories were private, but someone else had seen the article. On a Tuesday afternoon, Harris Mitchell walked into Eddie's office. Harris was 41 now, his hair showing threads of gray, his face lined with the years, but still carrying that essential kindness that had recognized something worth saving in a desperate kid all those years ago. "Quite a story they wrote about you," Harris said, holding up the newspaper. Eddie stood, genuinely happy to see him. "Harris, man, it's been too long. How's the warehouse?" "Same as ever. I'm running the whole operation now, day and night shifts." Harris settled into a chair, but his expression was serious. "Eddie, do you remember Calvin?" The name hit Eddie like a physical blow. Of course he remembered. How could he forget? "The night guard, the one who gave me the job, the one who gave you more than that," Harris said quietly. "Eddie, there's something you don't know, something you deserve to know." Eddie sat down slowly, his heart beginning to pound. "What do you mean?" Harris took a breath, choosing his words carefully. "The morning after you first came to the warehouse, corporate did an audit. They do them randomly, usually twice a year. They found the petty cash was short by $340. Eddie's blood went cold. Calvin was on duty that night. He was responsible for the money. They accused him of theft. Harris's voice was tight with old anger. "I tried to defend him, told them Calvin Jackson would cut off his own hand before he'd steal a dime, but they didn't care. No security footage because that camera had been broken for weeks. Calvin had filed 3 reports about it, and they'd ignored them all. Without proof, without an explanation, they fired him." "No," Eddie whispered. "No, he didn't. I know he didn't steal. And you know where that money went, don't you, Eddie?" Eddie couldn't breathe. The walls of his modest office, his achievement, his second chance, it all suddenly felt like it was built on Calvin's sacrifice. "He gave it to me. I tried to rob the warehouse, and he gave me money instead, for my mother's medicine. Oh God, I didn't know. I didn't know he never told anyone, never defended himself." Harris's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I asked him about it, practically begged him to tell me what really happened. You know what he said? Some things are worth more than a job. Don't worry about me, Harris. Just, if that kid comes back, help him. He deserves a chance." Eddie put his face in his hands. The magnitude of what Calvin had done, giving up not just money but his livelihood, his reputation, his future, for a kid who tried to rob him. It was incomprehensible. It was the most beautiful and devastating thing Eddie had ever heard. "Where is he?" Eddie asked urgently. "I need to find him. I visited him," Harris said. "Took me months to track him down after he left. He'd moved into a boarding house on the east side, was working part-time at a convenience store for minimum wage. Eddie, the man who'd worked 11 years faithfully, never missing a shift, was stocking shelves for pocket change. Why didn't he get another security job? No references. The warehouse wouldn't give him one, after the theft accusation. And Calvin, proud as he is, wouldn't tell the truth, because telling the truth meant you'd get in trouble. He chose protecting you over protecting himself." Eddie stood abruptly, pacing, his hands shaking. "I have to see him. I have to make this right. Harris, please, tell me where he is." Harris pulled out a piece of paper with an address. "I went to see him last week. Eddie, I won't lie to you, he's not doing well. He's sick, something with his lungs, from years of breathing in dust and chemicals in that warehouse, without proper ventilation. He doesn't have health insurance, obviously, hasn't been to a doctor because he can't afford it." The paper in Eddie's hand felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Will he? "I don't know. He's weak, coughing a lot, lost a lot of weight. But Eddie, here's the thing. I mentioned you, told him I'd heard you were doing well, that you'd made something of yourself. You know what he did?" He smiled, actually smiled, this big genuine smile I hadn't seen from him in years. He said, "Good, that boy deserved to make it. Makes everything worth it." Eddie's vision blurred with tears. "He doesn't even know me." "Why would he?" "Because Calvin Jackson is the best man I've ever known," Harris said firmly. "He doesn't have much. Never did. Lost his wife years ago, brother died in an accident, mother passed, no kids. But what he does have is this ability to see good in people. To believe in second chances. You were his second chance, Eddie. His proof that the world isn't completely gone to hell." Eddie grabbed his jacket. "Take me to him. Right now, please, you're sure? It's not pretty, the place he lives, the shape he's in." "Harris," Eddie said, his voice breaking, "this man saved my life, gave up everything so I could have a future. I've spent 5 years building a life on top of his sacrifice without even knowing it. The least I can do is face the cost of my second chance." They drove across town in silence, Eddie clutching the newspaper with his own success story on it. The article talked about determination and hard work, but it should have been about mercy. About a night guard who saw a scared kid and chose compassion over protocol, kindness over his own security. The boarding house was exactly as bleak as Eddie had feared, a sagging Victorian building converted into single rooms, paint peeling, windows that probably hadn't been washed in a decade. Harris led him up 3 flights of stairs that creaked ominously with each step. Room 307. Harris knocked gently. "Come in," a voice called, weaker than Eddie remembered but unmistakably Calvin's. Eddie opened the door and stepped into the small room. It was neat despite its shabbiness, everything organized with military precision. The same old radio sat on a windowsill, playing classical music. The same photograph of Calvin's mother sat on the small dresser, and in the narrow bed propped up on thin pillows was Calvin Jackson. He'd aged more than 5 years should allow. His face was gaunt, his body thin beneath the blanket, his breathing audibly labored. But his eyes, those eyes were the same, clear, and kind, and impossibly gentle. "Eddie Morrison," Calvin said, and even weak, his voice carried warmth. "Look at you. All grown up." Eddie crossed the room and dropped to his knees beside the bed, taking Calvin's hand, so thin now, fragile as bird bones. "I didn't know," he said, tears streaming down his face. "Mr. Jackson, I swear to God, I didn't know what it cost you. Harris just told me. I would have come forward. I would have come forward. I would." "Hey now," Calvin said softly, his other hand patting Eddie's. "What's done is done. And look how well you turned out. Harris showed me that article. You've made something of yourself, got your own business, helping people, staying clean. That's all I wanted. But you lost everything. Because of me." "No, son." Calvin's voice was firm despite its weakness. "I lost a job. There's a difference. But you could have lost your whole future. Could have ended up in jail, gotten a record, gone down a path you'd never come back from. Instead you became a good man. That's not losing, Eddie, that's winning the only game that matters." Eddie pressed Calvin's hand to his forehead, sobbing now. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Nothing to be sorry for. You came back, didn't you? That morning after, when you could have just taken the money and run. You came back because you're a man of your word. That told me everything I needed to know about who you really are." Harris, standing in the doorway, quietly wiped his own eyes. Eddie looked up at Calvin, at this man who'd given up everything for a stranger, who'd chosen faith over fear, mercy over judgment. "Let me help you, please. I have money now, not much but enough for doctors, for medicine, for a better place to live. Let me do for you what you did for me." Calvin started to protest, but Eddie cut him off. "Please, don't take this from me. Don't take away my chance to prove your faith wasn't misplaced. You gave me a second chance at life. Let me give you one too." Calvin looked at him for a long moment, then at Harris, then back to Eddie. Something in his expression softened, broke open. "You really turned out fine, didn't you?" he whispered. "Because of you," Eddie said. "Everything good in my life exists because of you." And for the first time in years Calvin Jackson cried, not from sadness or pain but from the overwhelming realization that maybe, just maybe, his life had meant something after all, that his loneliness and sacrifice hadn't been in vain. That in the darkness of that warehouse, on that rainy night 5 years ago, he'd planted a seed that had grown into something beautiful. "Okay," Calvin said finally. "Okay, son, help me. Let's see if this old guard has one more shift left in him." The transformation didn't happen overnight, but it happened. Eddie found Calvin a small apartment, nothing fancy but clean, bright, with windows that actually opened and let in fresh air. He took him to doctors who ran tests and prescribed treatments. The diagnosis wasn't good: years of untreated respiratory illness, damage that couldn't be completely undone, but it could be managed, made bearable. More than that, Eddie gave Calvin something he'd lost years ago: purpose. Every morning, Eddie would stop by with coffee, black for Calvin, same as always, and they'd sit together. Sometimes they talked. More often, they just existed in comfortable silence, the kind that only happens between people who've seen each other at their worst and chosen to stay anyway. Calvin, despite his protests, found himself folded into Eddie's life. When Eddie met with clients, sometimes Calvin would come along, offering quiet wisdom about construction and quality workmanship from his years of warehouse experience. When Eddie worked late on projects, Calvin would sit in the small office, that old radio playing, just keeping him company. "You don't have to babysit me," Calvin said one evening. "I know you've got better things to do than watch an old man drink coffee." Eddie looked up from the blueprints he'd been studying. "You're not old, you're 52. Feel like 90 some days." "Well, you're stuck with me anyway. I'm a persistent son of a bitch, learned that from a stubborn guard I used to know." Calvin chuckled, which turned into a cough, but he was smiling. "Your mama would be proud of you, you know. The man you've become." Eddie's throat tightened. Was. "I like to think she is, wherever she is." He paused. I think she'd be grateful to you too, for saving her son when she couldn't anymore." One night, 6 months after their reunion, Eddie came by with dinner and found Calvin looking at old photographs. The photo of his mother was there, but also others Eddie hadn't seen: a younger Calvin with a beautiful woman in a wedding dress, Calvin with a teenage boy who must have been his brother. "You had a family," Eddie said softly, sitting beside him. "Long time ago, lost 'em all one way or another. Wife left when my brother died, said I got too dark, too closed off. Can't say she was wrong. After that I figured it was safer not to let anyone in. Can't lose what you never have, right? That's the loneliest logic I've ever heard." Calvin smiled sadly. "Maybe, but you get used to it. The loneliness becomes like a room you live in. Eventually you forget what it's like to have neighbors." Eddie was quiet for a moment, gathering his courage. Then he pulled out an envelope from his jacket. "I want to show you something." Inside were legal documents. Calvin scanned them, confused at first, then his eyes widened. "Eddie, this is adoption papers." "Well, adult adoption papers. It's a thing you can do, apparently." Eddie's voice was shaking but determined. "Look, I know it's weird. I'm 23 and you're 52. But Calvin, you don't have anyone, and neither do I. Not really. My mom's gone. No dad in the picture, no siblings. And you gave up everything for me. You saw me at my absolute worst and believed I could be better. That's what fathers do, isn't it?" Calvin's hands trembled as he held the papers. "Son, you don't owe me. It's not about owing, it's about choosing. You chose to believe in me when I gave you every reason not to. I'm choosing to believe that family isn't just about blood, it's about who shows up, who stays, who sees you and doesn't run away." Eddie's voice cracked. "I want you to be my father. If you'll have me." Calvin set the papers down carefully, and Eddie watched a tear slide down the older man's weathered face. Then another. Calvin pressed his hands to his eyes, his shoulders shaking, and Eddie moved closer, putting an arm around him. "I thought," Calvin whispered, "I thought I'd die alone. Thought the warehouse would be the last place anyone remembered me. But you came back. Even after everything, you came back." "Of course I came back. You're the best man I've ever known." Calvin pulled Eddie into a fierce hug, this thin man who'd once had the strength to disarm a would-be robber, but now felt fragile as paper. "Then yes," he said. "Yes, I'll be your father. God help you, you're getting a damaged old guard as a dad." Eddie laughed through his own tears. "And you're getting a kid who once tried to rob you. Guess we're both taking a chance." "Best chance I ever took," Calvin said. "Best damn chance I ever took." The paperwork was filed. The judge, a kind woman in her 60s, asked Eddie why he wanted to do this. "Because he saved my life," Eddie said simply. "And now I want to give him a reason to love his." The judge approved it without hesitation. Calvin Jackson was no longer alone. And Eddie Morrison finally had the father he'd always needed. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Eddie's apartment, their apartment now, since Calvin had officially moved in 3 months ago. The old radio played Mozart, and the smell of fresh coffee filled the air. Calvin sat at the kitchen table, stronger now, the treatments and regular meals, and something else, hope maybe, bringing color back to his face. Eddie poured 2 cups of coffee, black for both of them now. Calvin had converted him. Big day, Calvin said, his voice carrying an excitement Eddie had rarely heard. You ready? Nervous, Eddie admitted. It's a lot. Today was the grand opening of the Calvin Jackson Foundation, a non-profit Eddie had spent the last year building. It wasn't a huge operation, not yet, but it was real. A place where teenagers who'd made mistakes, who'd gotten tangled up in bad choices or bad circumstances, could learn trades, get counseling, and most importantly, get a second chance without judgment. The foundation operated out of a renovated section of Morrison Warehouse, the very place where Eddie and Calvin's story had begun. Eddie had bought the building when it went up for sale, renovating it into part workspace, part training center, part community hub. They drove there together, Calvin insisting he was well enough despite Eddie's hovering. When they pulled up, dozens of people were already waiting. Harris Mitchell, now retired from warehouse work and volunteering as a mentor. Local teenagers who'd been referred by schools and social workers, community members who'd heard the story and wanted to be part of something good. Inside, the transformation was remarkable. The old warehouse had been turned into bright clean spaces, workshops for carpentry and metalworking, classrooms, a kitchen for culinary training, offices for counselors and case workers. And in the main hall, dominating one wall, was a large black and white photograph. Calvin stopped when he saw it. It was a photo of him from 15 years ago, in his security guard uniform, standing in front of Morrison Warehouse. He looked younger, less worn, but already carrying that quiet dignity that defined him. Below the photograph, a brass plaque read, "Sometimes a simple man guards more than doors, he guards another man's soul." Calvin Jackson, security guard, and Father Calvin's eyes filled with tears. Eddie, I'm not a hero, you just saved my life, Eddie interrupted gently. And probably dozens of others will be saved because of what you taught me, that mercy matters more than punishment, that people deserve chances, that one moment of kindness can change everything. The ceremony began. Eddie stood at a podium, looking out at the crowd. He'd prepared a speech, had index cards and everything, but when he opened his mouth, the formal words flew away. 15 years ago, he began. I was a scared kid who made the worst decision of his life. I was desperate, watching my mother die, feeling powerless, and I thought the answer was to take what I needed from someone else. I broke into this warehouse with a box cutter I'd never used, and a plan I hadn't thought through. He paused, finding Calvin in the crowd. And I met a man who had every right to call the police, press charges, and throw my life away. Instead, he gave me $340, money that wasn't even his, and more importantly, he gave me belief. Belief that I could be better than my worst moment. Eddie's voice grew stronger. What I didn't know until years later was what that moment cost him. Calvin Jackson lost his job because of his kindness to me, lost his income, his reputation, his security. He spent years sick and struggling, living in poverty, all because he chose to save a stranger instead of protecting himself. The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. This foundation isn't just about teaching skills or providing resources. It's about embodying what Calvin taught me, that everybody deserves a second chance, that mercy is stronger than judgment, that one person's kindness can ripple out and change the world. Eddie smiled. Calvin likes to say that people are like keys, even bent ones can still open doors if you know which way to turn them. This place is about helping people find which way to turn. He gestured to Calvin, who stood reluctantly. This is Calvin Jackson. He's not a wealthy philanthropist or a celebrity. He was a security guard who earned minimum wage and lived alone. But he's also the best father a man could ask for. Even if I didn't meet him until I was 18 and he adopted me when I was 23. Laughter and tears rippled through the audience. Eddie said directly to Calvin, "You once told me that loneliness doesn't kill people, regret does. You also told me that when you can still choose to be good, you're not broken yet. You saved me from a lifetime of regret. You showed me how to choose good, even when it's hard. This foundation is my way of making sure your kindness doesn't stop with me, that it keeps going, keeps spreading, keeps changing lives the way you changed mine." Calvin walked slowly to the podium, Eddie stepping aside, but staying close. The older man looked out at the crowd, clearly uncomfortable with the attention, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "I don't deserve all this credit," Calvin said quietly. "Truth is, I was just as lost as Eddie when we met. maybe more lost. I'd spent years going through the motions, keeping everyone at arm's length, telling myself it was safer not to care. Then this kid broke into my warehouse, crying about his sick mother, and I saw something I'd forgotten existed. Someone who still believed things could get better, even at his lowest point. He paused, his hand gripping the podium. Eddie thinks I saved him, but he saved me too. Gave me a reason to believe my life meant something. Gave me a family when I'd resigned myself to dying alone. So this foundation, it's not about what I did, it's about what we can all do when we choose to see the person behind the mistake, the potential behind the problem. Calvin looked at Eddie, his eyes shining. I'm not lonely anymore, and that's worth more than any job, any money, any recognition. Being his father is the greatest honor of my life. The applause was thunderous. Harris Mitchell stood, followed by others, until the entire room was on their feet. After the ceremony, Calvin walked through the foundation with Eddie at his side. They visited the workshops where teenagers were learning carpentry and welding, the classroom where a former teacher was helping kids get their GEDs, the counseling offices where social workers would help families navigate the system. In one corner, they'd recreated Calvin's old security guard station, not the cramped, lonely original, but a tribute to it. The same type of desk, the same style of logbook, even a vintage radio. On the wall was the original photograph of Calvin's mother. You kept it, Calvin said, touching the frame gently. It belonged here. She raised a good man, even if that man didn't always know how good he was. A teenage girl approached them hesitantly. 16, maybe, with dyed black hair and nervous eyes. Mr. Morrison, Mr. Jackson, I'm Sarah. I'm in the program. I got caught shoplifting 6 months ago, and my school counselor told me about this place. Eddie shook her hand warmly. Welcome, Sarah. What are you interested in learning? I don't know yet. I'm glad there's somewhere that doesn't look at me like I'm trash. Somewhere that thinks maybe I can be something better. Calvin smiled at her, that gentle smile that had once stopped a scared boy from making a terrible mistake. You already are something better, you just had to find the right place to prove it. As the day wore on, more young people arrived, some referred by courts, some by schools, some just wandering in because they'd heard about a place that offered second chances. Each one received the same welcome, no judgment, just possibility. That evening, after everyone had left, Eddie and Calvin sat in the empty main hall, the photograph of young Calvin watching over them. You know what I realized today, Calvin said. For years I thought my life was small, just a guy watching warehouses, going through the motions, not mattering to anyone. But that one night, that one choice to help instead of hurt, it built all this. It's still spreading, like ripples in water, Eddie agreed. One stone thrown into darkness creates waves that touch shores you'll never see. Calvin looked at his son, this young man he'd met at knife point and chosen to save, who'd saved him right back. I used to tell Harris that loneliness doesn't kill you, regret does. I was wrong about that. You were, yeah, because I'm not lonely anymore, and I have zero regrets, not about the money, not about the job, not about any of it. Every hard day, every struggle, every moment I thought I was alone, it was all leading to this, to you, to us, to this. Eddie reached over and took his father's hand. When I was standing in this warehouse, 15 years ago, holding that stupid box cutter, I was so scared. I thought my life was over, that there was no way out. And then you looked at me, and saw something worth saving. You didn't see a criminal. You saw a kid who needed help. Calvin Jackson had spent years as a security guard, watching over warehouses and inventory, protecting things that could be replaced. But the night he met Eddie Morrison, he'd guarded something irreplaceable, a young man's soul, his future, his potential for good. And in return, Eddie had guarded Calvin's heart, his hope, his belief that life could still hold beauty and meaning, and love. They'd both been right, and they'd both been saved. Not by grand gestures or dramatic rescues, but by the quiet, persistent choice to see good in each other, to believe in second chances, to understand that mercy is the strongest force in the world. The door closed on their old lives of loneliness and regret, and opened on something neither had dared to hope for, home.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons.
Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.